Well, greetings, friends, and welcome again to Oh, the Places You'll Go. We go to amazing places, mostly that I've been, but some that you've been. And that may be more the case today because I want to start in Ireland. I'm going to call this my St. Patrick's Day edition. It'll come out right before St. Patrick's Day. Of course, you may be viewing it next fall or sometime. But anyway, so St. Patrick, Ireland. Ireland. If you want to talk about a beautiful country, oh my goodness. Lisa and I were able to go there, and we rented a car and we drove around and you see old church ruins. It's just what a green, beautiful place, beautiful country. Patrick, of course now he's associated with, drinking Guinness on March 17th. But so Patrick lived in the 5th century, that's the 400s, a long time ago. He was the first bishop of Ireland, and that's always funny to say. There wasn't much to be a bishop over back then, very few Christians. And his story is shrouded in legend, of course. He's British originally, right? But he was captured by some Irish pirates. He was a slave. He escaped, went back home, but then he remembered Ireland. It was just how beautiful it was, so the people there, and he felt God call him to be a missionary back to Ireland. Great story. There's sacred places all over the United Kingdom. And I know a lot of our folks have been there on business or on vacation and so on, but there's so many sacred places that are worth reflecting over. I want to think about two of them today. They're kind of twins on either side of the country. One is Iona, and the other is Lindisfarne. Now, Iona is a little island off the west coast of Scotland. And it's a lovely, peaceful place, a retreat center. People love to go there. Our choir actually went there. And I still remember Jimmy Jones said, "We're going to go to Iona for the day." And I said, I'm exhausted just hearing about it. Because it's hard to get there. To get to Iona, you start at Oban. If you know, there's one of the Scotch whiskeys, Oban. You start at that town. There's a ferry. You drive onto the ferry. And the ferry goes across to the Isle of Mull, and then there you get back in your car and you drive across the Isle of Mull, which is pretty desolate. You get to the other side of Mull, and then you can see Iona across the water, but to get there you take a little foot ferry. You can't drive any farther. And you get on the foot ferry and you go across. It takes hours and hours to get to Iona, but I tell you, once you get there, it is a peaceful place. There are very few cars. There are very few people. It's an island that is devoted to prayer and worship. It's an amazing thing. So there's a monastery there. Now it's been rebuilt, of course, but in the 6th century, that'd be the 500s, a guy named Columba, St. Columba, founded a monastery there. And it's just a lovely place to visit. He was from Ireland and had come to this island off Scotland. And one of the beautiful things about Iona is they have these, large crosses. There's this St. Martin's cross that everybody stops and takes a photo of. That cross dates back to the 6th century. That is old. That's that's such an old cross, and it's still standing there. Absolutely beautiful. In 1938, a guy named George MacLeod established an Iona community there that's devoted to prayer and to worship and leading retreats for other people who go there. I love George MacLeod. He has so many quotable things, but I did want to read this one thing to you that's probably my favorite thing that he ever came up with. He wrote these words: "I simply argue that the cross be raised again at the center of the marketplace, as well as on the steeple of the church. I am recovering the claim that Jesus was not crucified in a cathedral between two candles, but on a cross between two thieves, on the town garbage heap, at a crossroad of politics so cosmopolitan that they had to write his title in Hebrew and in Latin and in Greek, and at the kind of place where cynics talk smut, and thieves curse, and soldiers gamble, because that is where Jesus died, and that is what he died about. And that is where Christ's own ought to be. And that is what church people ought to be about." Right? I just love that. You may also know one of the leaders of that Iona community in worship is a guy named John Bell. I've gotten to be acquainted with John a little bit over time. He wrote a song that we sing in church sometimes. It's not in our hymnal, but we've sung it quite a few times. It's called The Summons, one of the best modern hymns ever developed. This whole idea of seclusion, of going to an island that's set apart from everything else, there's something spiritual about that, like getting away from the hustle bustle of everything else. How do we find for ourselves an island? It doesn't have to be a little island surrounded by water. I have a friend, he said he's created a little island within his home, a little quiet place. He doesn't do anything else there. But he goes there, and it's decorated. It's got a cross, it's got a kneeler, it's got some prayer books. He said that's his island where he goes to pray. Something about seclusion. Over time, Christians they've gone to the desert, they've gone to mountain places. St. Francis of Assisi, whom we talked about a lot in this series, his island usually was some cave up in a mountain. He would go up there to be alone, to pray with God. He also went to an island in Lake Trasimeno. There's an island there. I've never gotten to visit it. I've seen it many times. I've never had time when I'm passing through to take a boat over there. And he would go there and would pray and reflect over what God was asking him to do. My favorite little St. Francis story, seclusion, is one time he was St. Francis. He was so devout, right? So he took his friend, Brother Leo, with him to a cave. And he said to Brother Leo, wait here, I'm going to go into the cave and pray. And he would go in there and he would pray all day long, just pouring out his soul to God. And he came out and Brother Leo said, did God say anything? And Francis said, no, nothing. And the next day they went back and Francis went in the cave and prayed all day, came out. Brother Leo, did he say anything? No. Yeah. Day after day, same answer. Did God say anything? No. Finally, one day, Francis went, prayed in the cave all day, came out, and Brother Leo said, well, did he say anything today? And Francis said, well, yes. Leo was shocked. He said, God spoke to you today after all that prayer? And Francis said, yes. And Leo said, what did he say? And Francis said, he just said one word. God said, more. More. After all of that, God, I want more of you, more of your heart, more of yourself. I love that. On the other side of Scotland, there's another island. It's called Lindisfarne. I'll never forget. I was visiting two of my friends and I were in Edinburgh. We were staying with the in-laws of one of my two friends, and I got up for breakfast that morning. We were planning to go to Lindisfarne. So I get up, and Pat, she's died now, the master of hospitality. I'm going to tell you about her on another edition of this. Pat gets up and she says, oh, good morning, where are you boys off to today? And I said, oh, we're going to Lindisfarne, Pat. And she said, have you checked the tide tables? Have I checked that? I didn't know what this question meant. Well, Lindisfarne, this is so interesting. It's a little island, but then sometimes it's not an island. There's a causeway, and it floods at high tide, but at low tide, you can drive across on the road. So you got to pay attention to the tide table so you don't get stuck out there. People get stuck out there all the time, and it's hours and hours before you can come back home, sometimes overnight. Fascinating place. It's connected to the land, but it's not connected to the land. So St. Aidan, in the 7th century, left Iona. He was sent out as a missionary from Iona to start another center of Christianity, and they picked another place that was isolated from the mainland, Lindisfarne. I love this. Magnus Magnusson, that's just such a cool name, wrote a book about Lindisfarne. He's a great Scottish historian. Here's what he says about Lindisfarne. He says, it was intimately connected to the mainland, but sufficiently apart from it to encourage a sense of willing withdrawal. It was of the world, but not worldly, insular, but not isolated. Then he adds, of course, it must have reminded him of Iona. I love that idea. How do we find a place that it's connected to the world but not in the world? Jesus said to the disciples at the Last Supper, you'll be in the world but not of the world. And I wonder, where are spaces where we can achieve that? We're insular but not disconnected from the world, because ultimately what we're about is to be connected to the world and to be God's people in the world. Lindisfarne. It's an absolutely fabulous. I also love this. In one of my books, I reflected on that connectivity of Lindisfarne to the mainland. And also that for St. Aidan, how Lindisfarne felt connected to Iona. And what I wrote was this. Iona, the island on the other side of Scotland, was where he had been schooled in the faith. One sacred space elicits memories of another. We sense God here because we sensed God somewhere else. I go like that. If you come to our church and you sense God here, it might be because you've never sensed God anywhere else, but I bet very often you sense God here because something resonates from another place where you have sensed God. Maybe it was your childhood church, maybe it was a retreat you went on when you were in college, who knows? You knew God somewhere, and then the recollection of that helps you to recall God, to discover God in this place. I think it's how God uses different places. So you can go there today if you check the tide tables and don't get caught. There's the Lindisfarne Priory. It's kind of a little cathedral that they planted there back in the day, and the ruins of it are fascinating to walk around. One monk who lived there and became famous was named St. Cuthbert. St. Cuthbert. There is, in the city of Edinburgh, maybe the second largest church there after St. Giles, where our choir sang St. Cuthbert's. Years ago, one of my buddies had gone to Scotland, and he worked at St. Cuthbert's, and I was coming to visit, and they asked me to preach. And I thought, man, what an honor to preach at St. Cuthbert's, this great cathedral church there in Edinburgh. So I remember we got robed in the back with the other priests. We're getting ready to go in, and so the way we came in wasn't like our church in the back, which came in through the choir loft. So I remember I went up the steps, and I looked through the little window into the choir loft, and it was full of people, the choir loft. And I thought, man, I expect a huge crowd out in this big cathedral. I came out, everybody was sitting in the choir loft. They couldn't heat the church very well, so they had little space heaters, right, just for the people in the choir loft. So there were probably 25 people there. When I preached at St. Cuthbert's, kind of like church in Europe, is how it goes a lot of the time. Cuthbert was, to me, he's exemplary of what has happened to the church over time, right? So Cuthbert lived there, taught there. One of the fascinating things to find there are the Lindisfarne Gospels. They did these ornate copies of the Bible there, these fabulous manuscripts. They're all absolutely beautiful. So Cuthbert was part of that, and led that, and so he was there at Lindisfarne, and lo and behold, after he died, they buried him with great pomp and circumstance. But then in the year 793, a horrible thing happened to the Christian community at Lindisfarne. The Vikings, I remember thinking, oh, the Vikings, wow, what courageous guys they were. The Vikings wreaked havoc on Christianity all over Europe, but certainly in the United Kingdom. And so they came to Lindisfarne and burned it to the ground. Some of the monks there managed, when they realized that the Vikings were coming, in the nick of time, they got away with those Lindisfarne Gospels. They now sit in the British Museum, and you can view them there. But they also took the remains of St. Cuthbert. They took his body and they spirited it away because he was such a sacred man. He was so holy to them. And they took it to the Durham Cathedral and buried him there. It's almost like a parable of Christianity. There have been places where Christianity was birthed and it was strong and it was valuable to that place for a period of time, but then it all came to be lost. I take people to Turkey, and in much of Turkey, we go to the cities where the Apostle Paul founded these churches that were really the bulwark of early Christianity. You cannot find active churches now in those places in Turkey. It doesn't mean it was invalid during its time. They served the purpose, and that's how Christianity came to us, through those churches in Turkey that Paul founded that are no more. The church is always endangered, but yet the church finds a way to survive, like those monks who escaped from the island with the violent Vikings were coming. Of course, I have a fondness for the Durham Cathedral for different reasons. The first time I went there, I was in school in Durham, North Carolina. So, man, I'm going to Durham in the United Kingdom to see the cathedral there, and it's really splendid. There's actually an active congregation that does wonderful things. Friends, thank you for joining us through this brief tour, thinking about St. Patrick and Iona and Lindisfarne. Wherever you go, I would encourage you, try to find a little church somewhere and what's its history and what's been going on there. There's something almost everywhere, some spiritual something. And to me, it just enriches the journey and also reminds you that we're Christian people. We're spiritual people. We need that all the time, wherever we go. Friends, thank you for joining us for Oh, the Places You'll Go.